Welcome to Old Path and our study through the New Testament book of Revelation. We are currently going through the third chapter, and this is part of the seven churches. We get to the sixth of the seven churches, which is Philadelphia. And in just a moment, I'll put up a map. I won't leave it up the whole time. I've heard from more than one person that listen to the studies that just say that the map is distracting. I guess it's a little bit different than the one that we put up. There's an image we've been putting up on Psalm 119 because of the comparison of the Hebrew and the Greek, or I'm sorry, the Hebrew and the English. I'm not usually one who leaves those kind of things up anyway. I've done it with the seven churches here, but I'll just do it for the first part of it. Don't want it to be a distraction to anyone. But we'll go through Philadelphia today. Again, the sixth of the seventh churches, or the seven churches, I should say. And each one of them, it's really interesting. There are some things that are obviously characteristic about every single one of the churches, but there's not really a kind of a pattern, I guess you could say, where each church, he says, I'm okay with this, but I'm not okay with that. We don't get that in all of them. There's not one simple pattern that is held by all of the churches, and there are some things that are standard. There is the promise to the overcomer and to him who has an ear. Then there's always the greeting of what Jesus has to say to the churches, and he addresses it to the angel, which we will see here. What really changes is obviously the internal things happening in a particular church. Philadelphia is really kind of the model for the churches by the things that we see, and we know that there are two churches that he has only complimentary things to say, nothing in the way of correction. But the other one, of course, being Smyrna, but Smyrna was undergoing some terrible persecution that we're only getting, glimpses of or little hints at it. As far as Philadelphia is concerned, it seems like it would be a much better ideal situation for the believer, given the choice between the two. So it is kind of funny when you hear people talk about the churches. They think of their church and of themselves and the church that they belong to as very reminiscent of the church at Philadelphia. But interestingly enough, it should be seen as an individual kind of a thing, because I've pastored for a number of years and was part of a fellowship in California for 35. And I can definitely tell you that in my years of being around there, especially in leadership, though I would look at our church as very Philadelphian in its doctrine and the things that God may look at in that particular church, I believe he would have been complimentary towards that church. Yet I do believe that there were people in that church from time to time who really were kind of more in keeping with the types of things you might see happening in other churches. So it helped me to understand a bit how you can have churches where he has some very, very stern warnings about the things taking place in their church, but also does mention that there are people in the church who have been incredibly faithful. So it's very, very, I think, wrong for us to try to do a straight across comparison of the modern church to this one at this time, because again, this is first century. These are churches that have really only been in operation for decades, not for a couple thousand years. And the atmosphere, or I guess you could say the culture in which they lived, made it where the church was just kind of its own entity and didn't really have the freedom like we might understand in the West. So people were very much invested with one another, and it wasn't like they had a lot of options that were open to them. If you were a professing Christian in any one of these churches, you were going to be involved with that group of people in that particular town. It's not like something so spread out like the United States. These are cities in a specific part of the world. So it's really helpful for us to be able to look at the things said to those churches, making a proper application to the 21st century, and not thinking that it's just a straight across comparison of their days to ours. I think if we try to do that, we really kind of run into an awful lot of error. So anyhow, interesting things. Let me throw out a couple of just simple little things to get us started, kind of things that I've said already in advance in the other weeks. But I find this to be very, very interesting, and I think this is, again, something that church leadership ought to be very, very careful when they consider the 7 churches. Because as I would put it, and I don't think there's a way that I can't see any other way forward than what I'm about to say. When I consider these churches, considering where it was in that time of human history and where it was in its location, these churches had to have been influenced and started very closely together in time. Again, we're not even out of the 1st century, and the gospel hadn't even gone to the Gentiles by the time that this was being written to them. It had been less than 40 years since the gospel went to the Gentiles, getting to this part of the world, probably closer to 30 to 40. So, however it may have been, these churches are all in the same general location, as you'll see on the map. And just remember, when you're looking at these pictures, especially those ones that are along the coast, the first ones in particular, Ephesus and then Pergamos, you're going to notice, Smyrna, then Pergamos, you're going to notice that the water that they're up against is the Aegean Sea. So we're talking about the west coast of modern day Turkey. And so that's where it is in the world. By the time that the gospel got out there, these are fledgling kind of churches, even as John writes to them. So they've been in operation for, let's just say, decades. And yet there are all these differing problems that are happening in churches that really were having the same kind of travel routes. People were coming and going from each one of them, but there were internal dynamics at the churches and maybe even in the towns and wherein they were located, but it's still in the pagan Roman world. So that doesn't really excuse any of the churches away from it. I believe that wherever you will find corruption, and the worse the corruption, the worse I believe you see the leadership. And it's one of the reasons why I believe that when you hear Jesus talk about to the angel of a particular church, I don't think he's talking about the winged supernatural creature for a number of reasons I've already gone over, but they would be the people more in charge of the day-to-day of that particular church. And when they are addressed, they're held in that place of accountability for the body itself. That's why he's addressing them and the things happening in the church over which they have been considered as the messenger. So angel, messenger, same word in the Greek. English is angel, but the meaning of the word angel is a messenger. So sometimes they can be supernatural, other times it's just people. And so it works well with the text that we would look at this. It's my personal opinion and view that we're talking about the leadership of a particular church. So if that's the case, and if there is corruption in some of the churches but not all, that's more of a reflection on the leadership and their fidelity to the Word of God, which you kind of see here as far as Philadelphia, and it's part of the address that Jesus says to them about what's happening in them as a church, but it's a top to bottom kind of thing. So some of the other churches, you've got some real bad elements in it, but you've got some people that are really, really sticking to it. There's an internal warfare, I guess you could say, between the people, that there are those that are wanting to do things that God hates and others who are trying to be faithful to Him. There's no such impression left with us as far as Philadelphia is concerned in this address. There's nothing like that shows some kind of internal struggle for the ones doing rightly versus those that are really facing judgment. So it's all of that makes this one particular church really fascinating, and they all have their characteristics that I find very, very intriguing by what is said to them. And this one has a couple of real big things that are said that really kind of don't have consensus as far as the people's views of what is being said here. But I'll just try to stick with what I see as the context and the big picture of it. And there are a couple of places in this particular address that make some people a little bit uncomfortable. So, book of Revelation, chapter 3, we begin at verse 7, which is the church at Philadelphia. And let me go ahead and bring up the map, and we'll have a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for the time that we can spend in your word and what you can reveal to us and how we can grow in our understanding of what we read and how important it is. We would pray, God, that you would give us ears to hear, as it says, to all of the churches, and not just at their time, I believe, Lord, for all times. What might we be able to learn? So we pray that as we study the history, that we would be attentive to what we can know from that, and then when we make application to our own lives here and now and to our own churches, would you help us to see the proper application for what we learn? May we be students of your word. We give you all thanks, we give you praise, and ask that you would be glorified in Jesus' name. All right, so as you look at the map here, and you'll see Philadelphia is located on that arch. Along, you see all the churches on the left-hand side of the arch, and then it kind of comes down. You're going to get to Philadelphia and ultimately to Laodicea. The church at Colossae is very close to Laodicea, as you can see there, down a little bit to the southeast of Laodicea. As far as Philadelphia is concerned, we've had a little trouble trying to figure out what some of the names of the churches are. This one is very, very simple because it's Philadelphia, and sometimes you'll hear people refer to Philadelphia here in our country, if you're in the United States, as the city of brotherly love. And so people might think that somehow that is just some kind of euphemism that's been made about the people in Philadelphia. That's actually what the name means. It's two words together, which is philos, meaning love, and this is the kind of love that you might have for your brothers, your sisters in the Lord, and sometimes that is the word that is used, not agape, but philos is that having a great fondness for somebody. You care very deeply for them, their friendship, and that kind of fellowship type of love that you have for a friend. And then adelphos is brother. And so brothers, love of the brethren. So Philadelphia, that's the name of the church, the name of the town, Philadelphia, the love of the brothers, or the brotherly love that's there. So philos and adelphos, those two words kind of put together is Philadelphia. So the address is this, and then to the angel of the church in Philadelphia, write these things. So John is being told by Jesus to write to that messenger that is there in Philadelphia. Once again, I just believe if you're going to try to write a warning to a church, you're not writing that to an angel, because then the angel would be the person that would be writing. Jesus would go directly to them. But if you're putting something in writing to a particular angel at the church, it's not as though you've got some winged creature sitting in the doorway at the church waiting for a letter to show up from Jesus through John to the church. It makes much more sense that we're talking about a human person here, and the ultimate responsibility before a church is that one who's left in the place of accountability, as we see Paul did with Titus, as he did it with Timothy. It's just that way of making sure that the person that is in charge, if you will, is really left in charge whenever something needs to be said to the church. So he says this. Now, these things says he who is, and this is where we're getting, in all of the different churches, Jesus gives qualifications sometimes, not only by authority, sometimes it's showing his deity, other times it's a physical appearance that is given, but it's always intended to demonstrate who he is in his uniqueness. Sometimes it's pretty obvious why he says what he says about himself because of the caution that's coming to a church. Now, there's no cautions coming to this one. There are a couple of, there are no corrections coming to it. There are cautions at the end of it. And it's to not look any other way other than how you have been. It's that staying with what you know to be true and not giving up. So important that we catch that too. It's a good thing if we pay attention to that warning. Now, as he says here, now these things says he who is holy and he who is true, he who has the key of David, he who opens and no one shuts, and shuts and no one opens. Now, as far as descriptions and the things that Jesus would say about himself, these ones are unique, and there's more of them than there are in any of the other addresses to any of the churches. So I'm going to bring down the map now. I think we all know pretty much where Philadelphia is. So let's move on and we'll look at the text and kind of break down bits and pieces of it. So let's look at the individual elements of this. what we hear is that these things says he who is holy and he who is true. Let's deal with the first part of those first two things, because these are, once again, things that would be indicative of him and him alone. There's an article in front of them. So it's not only that he's one among many as holy and true, but he is an article setting him apart, making him singularly different from all others. So holy is meaning set apart, and in his case, it's perfect, set apart, and the only one, or the singular one, who is holy above all others. And the same thing when it comes to being said here that he is also true. So this is with total accuracy. And it's because of these first two, I believe, that we get the other ones as well. It's what qualifies him to do what he does. So when we look at Jesus in his identification, once again, these are singular, and they're definite articles. So that means that the person that's being spoken of here, in this case, speaking of himself, he says, I am holy and I am true, in a category where no one else is as holy or is as true as he is. He's not among many. So anybody, each of us, I would think, as believers, would want to be able to say we are holy because we're called holy. That means set apart, and that what we do is true. It's accurate. But we're not perfect in that. We will fail from time to time, sometimes because of just lack of knowledge, other times willfully. But in Jesus's case, there is never a time when he is not exactly those things. So it's why he is set apart and different. It's why he's able to say what he says, not only to this church, but to all churches, to make the promises that he makes, to make the statements that he makes, because it's not as though he doesn't already know the outcome of things. He hasn't already seen, and we get that in his words here. We'll get that in a second. But when we see these titles, that he's holy and true, he's holy and true in a category all by himself. He is singularly that which is true, that which is holy, at the exclusion of all others. Now, that doesn't mean that others cannot have these traits. They just don't have them in the same way that he does, because he's God in the flesh. He's eternal, perfect. He's the creator. We are none of the above. We are part of his creation, but called into fellowship with him, which he talks about a little bit further on. Now, after those singular attributes, notice what he says. He has the key of David, which is an important matter for a few reasons. And we'll take a look at a couple of passages here because they're important. The first one that I would refer you to is found in 2 Samuel chapter 7, and that's the place where David wants to build the temple for God that Solomon ultimately builds. And when he says this to Nathan, I want to build God a house, let me just kind of paraphrase it. You can see it, 2 Samuel chapter 7. And David says, I want to build God a house. And Nathan said, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but reading into it a little bit, everything that you touch is great. I'm sure God's with you. Go ahead and build it. And God has to tell Nathan, I didn't tell you to tell him that. I need you to go back and you tell him this. You're not going to build me a house, but your son's going to build it for me. However, I will build for you a house. And that is in the sense of heritage and legacy. It's an enduring. Sometimes we think of the house of, and it can go on for generations when we think of it in an earthly sense. In an eternal sense, because we're talking about God's house here, it begins with the promise made to David, really to Jesse, because he's mentioned in Jesus's genealogy as being, through Jesse, but Jesse to David, and not Solomon, but through David's son Nathan. So anyhow, that's the ultimate genealogy of Jesus, but the house would be built ultimately of Solomon, but there would be an enduring kingdom that would come through the line of David. So that's a key that's been given to him because he's in that genealogy. And because he has that authority of that prophecy, he's able to do the things that he is just about to speak of doing. One of the other ones that you can look at, which you'll find in, and we see it at Christmas every year, it's in Isaiah 9, where it talks about that Jesus, the government would be upon him, and that he is, that son of David as well. So that imagery is given there as well. But let me look at one other one with you real quick. Let's go to Luke chapter 1. And this is going back to the announcement of Jesus' birth. So that tells you kind of how far back we're going. So Luke 1, and we're going to start at verse 30. Let's see. Let's just go to verse 26. So we'll do the whole context of it. So this is the announcement, again, of Jesus' birth. And so in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent to the city of Galilee called Nazareth to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph of the house of David. There you go. That's the beginning of it, but there's more that's being said. And her name was Mary. And having come in, the angel said to her, and again, Joseph is going to get his own announcement. He will have his own said to him, but this is covering what was said to Mary. Rejoice, highly favored one, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women. But when she saw him, she was troubled at this saying, and she considered the manner of greeting that this was. So the angel said to her, do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And behold, you will conceive in your womb, and you will bring forth a son, and he will be called Jesus. His name will be called Jesus. As a little side note, if you haven't been studying along in our work through Psalm 119, there are a number of places where David talks about God's salvation. And when you look at that word salvation, it's Yeshua. And Yeshua would be the Old Testament word for salvation. When we look at the Bible in the New Testament, we see Jesus. It is what we would have the English translation of what was the Hebrew, which would have been Yeshua, Joshua, Jesus. So just interesting. David speaks about it more, not as a person. When David's speaking about it, when he speaks of salvation, he's talking about being delivered from, in the eternal sense and sometimes even in the temporal sense. But Yeshua would be salvation, the idea that God would set him free. With us, we believe in salvation, absolutely Yeshua in the way of God delivering and giving salvation. But we also have him in the personal sense. Jesus, his name means that. Jehovah is salvation. Yeshua is the name meaning salvation. Just really, really cool stuff. So this is the announcement that is made. So it tells us in verse 32, and he will be great. He will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord will give him the throne of his father David. So he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. That means Israel. And of his kingdom there will be no end. So that you have David being an earthly king was given a promise about a forever king that would come through him. And here Jesus says of himself, because again, he's establishing this is the revelation of Jesus Christ, the apocalypsis. It's the unveiling, the revealing of who he is, and he is the one speaking authoritatively to the church here. What are his characteristics? Holy and true, singular, no one like him, because he's perfect in all of those things, but also that he has the key of David. So that simply means that he is the one who has the control to lock and unlock, open and shut, doing things that no one else can do, because first of all, that he's God in the flesh, of course. We already know that part there, but that he doesn't have to assert that in that he has right to it by proclamation. God said that this would be the case all the way back to David. So if you go and read that 2 Samuel 7, it's all right there for you to see. It's again reiterated as we look at through Isaiah 9, that unto us a son is born, unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and it speaks about the government being upon him, and that his name is Wonderful, Counselor, Everlasting, or the Father of Everlasting, the one who is, the one who is the giver of everlasting. Look at that whole litany of things, and again, you see it on Christmas cards most every year. If you get fellow Christians giving you Christmas cards, chances are you're going to hit Isaiah 9. So with that all said, here David is in mind, and Jesus as being his direct descendant is the one who receives that prophecy. That's the one who is being spoken of in the prophecies, and here then Jesus identifies that and identifies with it and says that he's the one who has the keys to David, because he's about to talk about opening and shutting. So that means that opening and shutting doors is, again, I believe that it's a time-stamped kind of a thing, because he's talking about the close of their reality as they understand it, and the church to this day stands in that same place of imminence, that the Lord could return at any time, and that means that he would bring a close to things. So when he talks about opening and closing doors, I think it's beyond just he's opened it on an individual level for me to go and do this. He's opened a door that we could move to this town, or he's opened this door that he's given me a job. This, I believe, as he's saying this, is meant in a much larger sense. Can it have real world ramifications? Absolutely. If he's speaking to an entire church that they have a door open to them, great. Does that mean to do things here on the earth? Absolutely. Does it mean that they have entrance into the very kingdom that's being spoken of here? That absolutely works as well, and I believe that's more what he's getting at. But of course, because you're a recipient of what is to come, there are things that you would do here on this earth. So I don't want to be so dogmatic about any particular part of it. We'll get to a little bit more that he says about this, but that he opens doors that no one else can open. He shuts ones that no one else can shut. Who is he that he's able to do that? Because he's the faithful and the true. He's the singular Son of God, and we are sons in the sense as the church, but we are not him. So he is the one who is deity, and this is all these are all things said about him that shows that he governs in a way that no one else can. So the opening and closing of doors, it really fits nicely with what we read through the rest of the book, because he makes promises of things that he will do, and that he is the one responsible for the way that these things are going to be working out. So again, when it talks about opening, this word that we have for opening doors that no one can open, it's the same word that's used when we get to chapter 5, where he begins to open the scroll. And so when we get there to chapter 5, that Jesus is found as the only one capable and the only one worthy, the only one who is able to open the scroll, that's because he is of a different kind than anyone else. And I don't want to go too far ahead. We'll deal with that in chapter 5. Hugely important that we understand what's being said there. So this opening and closing of doors, one other thing that I think is really, really interesting, and you know what, let's save it until we get to where he talks about that they have a door open to them. So let's look at verse 7 again, just to get through all pieces of it. These things says he who is holy and true. We covered that. The holiness and the trueness is that it's significant to him above all else. He's the singular, the one who is set apart, singularly holy, and the one who is totally accurate. There is no error in him. So he's the one who has the key of David. He is the one upon whom the government will be, and in the eternal sense, in the millennial sense, here and now, he's that person. He who opens and no one shuts, and shuts and no one opens. That means total authority for when he governs who comes in, who goes out, and as long as he holds the door open, no one can shut it. As long as he has shut the door, no one can get in. So very important that we understand that. Now he says this, I know your works. Very common in the 7 churches, and his knowledge is not secondhand by reading or by somebody giving report. He's been an eyewitness to it. So it's eido instead of gnosis. So it's not anything other than I've been here, not as a casual, but as a firsthand involved observer. I know these things. Your works is the fruit of the ministry there and of the individuals. I see what your church produces. So that's the idea that he sees their works, or he knows their works. See, he says now, see, I have set before you an open door, and no one can shut it, for you have a little strength, and you have kept my word, and you have not denied my name. Very, very important. There's 3 things said at the end of that sentence. But where he says that I have set before you an open door. This is what I want to contrast with what we're going to look at next week. That here Jesus says to the church, I stand here at this door. I have opened it to you, and you have access. Now, access to what is the question? Some would hypothesize it means that they have an open door to share the gospel. They're not in a place of persecution like Smyrna was. They're not in a place where there's internal strife and problems and apostasy and all the rest of that stuff. But this door that's open is that they can come and go and do the things in the world that they want to do. I can see somebody making that case, but it seems to be much more so in the sense of I have fellowship with you and you have fellowship with me. This door is open to you because they have not done anything to close it. They haven't cut off fellowship. In Laodicea, remember, he's at the door and knocking. So important that we recognize that if a door is open to one but closed to another, that again is going to be a reflection on the people. In this case, they have a door that's open to them. Now, if they have fellowship with him to do the things that he would have for them to do, that door is open to them. They have to, first of all, recognize that it is, which obviously they have. They know that that door is open. They would be guided and given empowerment by the Holy Spirit, and they would recognize that we have fellowship. We have in and out privileges directly to the throne room of God through Jesus the Son, and that gives them also the access to do his bidding in the world. He doesn't have to correct things in the church. They have that open door. So then he says these three things. Given that is the truth, you've got this open door. I believe that this is, again, speaking of fellowship that they have with the Lord, and everything is in its proper order for them to do what they're doing there and here and now. And so if it's a modern church, if a church here has an open door that God has put before them, that means that the Spirit is moving in them. They're attentive to what he wants to do. There's nothing that's creating a problem in fellowship, and they are free to operate as he dictates to them, as he gives them instruction by the Spirit. Okay, with that being in place, if this is the case, it says you have a little strength, and then these two parts. You've kept my word, and you have not denied my name. Let's deal with the first part of this, and again, there's not always agreement on this, about that they have a little strength. Some people might see that, and some have, scholars have looked at it that's Jesus saying, I wish that you had a lot of strength, but you have a little. And so that it's really said in kind of a, not as a put down, but just about like that. It's more of a statement about you're not very strong. But the rest of the book doesn't really seem to look that way. I think what it means more, again, context seems to be an indication that, as he says, you have a little strength compared to who he is and what what he's capable of doing. By measure, theirs is little. But if it was something that there's not much faith in your church and you don't have much strength, you just got a little, that would be said in other ways of critique. It doesn't seem to be in any way a critique, because everything that he wants them to do with that little strength it really affords them some incredible benefits, and the things that he says he's going to do because they've been faithful. And it's not, you have a little strength, you'll get in by the skin of your teeth. It's not that kind of an address to them. So I don't want to get tripped up on that you have a little strength. I think that's probably, as the churches go, that's probably about as good of a commendation as he can give, or he has given to any of the churches. So you have a little strength. You have this open door to you. You have the ability to do the things that you're doing. And he goes to explaining to them where you have people who have, as a church, he says, you as a church have not denied my name. You've kept my word. You have other churches that have had similar things said of them, but it's only a particular element within the church and not the church as a whole. So as the church here is being addressed, they have all, because he makes no exclusion, they have all kept his word. And that keeping of the word is that it's something that it's prized to them. It's something that if they could have their hands on it, they would kind of hold it close to their chest. They would keep it to themselves, not allowing anything to happen. They would keep guard over it. Now, that's more of an internal reaction. That keeping means that it's valued to you and you will hold it. Now, that's going to show outwardly, but it begins by being an inward thought. I hold the word of God. It's important to me, and I want to be obedient to it. I will not let it go. I won't forsake it. I won't neglect it. It's something that I will hold to myself, and I will heed that. Now, also, the idea of denying his name is something that none of them have done, because if it had been done by some, he would again qualify it. You have some there who have not denied my name. You've got that in Sardis. So, as far as Philadelphia is concerned, this seems to be very universal in the church. And this does mean that they have had opportunity. You have not denied my word. You don't make a statement like that unless people have had ample opportunity. Now, nothing has changed in 2,000 years. every person who is a believer will have at some point in their life, and churches as well, are going to have to take a stand for what it is that they profess to believe. Now, some churches, they've got Jesus' name on the building or somewhere in their history, but when they're given a chance and put in that place of needing to testify of him and being faithful to him, they are not. They're doing it in name only, but they're just as crippled by the culture and bowing to it as even the unsaved. And it's happening in our day. It would have been happening in theirs. As we see, some of these churches have some real problems in them. So here, again, the implication is you've had ample opportunity to deny me, but you haven't. So those two very wonderful things. You have a little strength, that's the first part, but it's what really what is I guess you could say, the source of their strength? What is the source of their power? Of course, the Holy Spirit, but you see it in the way that they conduct themselves. They have a little strength because they're careful about holding his word to themselves and keeping it. It's important to them, and they live accordingly. It's inward. But then outwardly, when given the opportunity, you don't do the easy thing and deny him. You do at whatever cost. You make sure that you make him known. Now, because he says those things to them, there is obviously a reward that is implied here, and he's going to get to that part here. So he says to them, indeed, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan, which is what we see in Smyrna, the people that were probably the root cause of the problems to the church there at Smyrna. That was referred to as the synagogue of Satan, as he says there. These are the people who profess themselves as Jews, but they are not. So if they were genuinely Jewish believers, they wouldn't be doing the things that they're doing. These are seen as adversaries to them, and here they're mentioned the same way. So whoever it was that was creating the problems in Smyrna are at least present enough in Philadelphia, but it hasn't culminated in the kind of problems that we see at Smyrna in the second chapter, the second of the churches. So with that being said, we have here him saying that there are those, again, of the synagogue of Satan, those same people who profess themselves to be one thing, but they're actually another. Well, that's what he has to say about them in Smyrna. So clearly these people were in each of the towns, and if they had the ability to stir up trouble for that particular church in that particular town, it looks like they can. It hasn't happened in Philadelphia for reasons that we don't know. It is happening in Smyrna, and we don't know why there and not in the other place. I don't know that that's necessarily a thing that you will find as a reason that there's a failure in the church. That doesn't seem to be the case. So he says this, indeed, I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, who say that they are Jews, but they are not, but they lie, and it's not that they've lied in the past, but they lie continually, and they're always spreading misinformation. So they call themselves to be one thing. They demonstrate that they're another by the way that they do the things with you. They can claim whatever they want to, but their actions say something completely different. Indeed, I will make them come and worship before your feet, and you know that I have, and then know that I have loved you. Now, the idea of worshiping at the feet of the church there, let's be really careful. The English is a little bit troublesome here, because really there's only one person that you would ever bow at the feet of that person in the way of worshiping, and that would be Jesus. So it's clear Jesus is not going to be contradictory. It must be some way that we understand the text that's complementary. And so if that is the idea of them at some point when they're brought to that place where they are confronted and rebuked, that they will have to come as you do and worship, but they will do so in a lesser position or a lesser place, because of what they have said and done against you will not afford them the same place that you have. Now, whether that's that they join your part and then come to an understanding of just how wicked they've been, or the day that like we see when it says that the day's coming when every knee bows and every tongue confesses that Jesus is Lord, that we see in the book of Philippians. If that's the case, then these people may very well do that under duress, and the idea that they're being judged for what they've done. So, and they will recognize this when they come to that place of having to recognize what they have done, that they will have to worship, and it will be in an inferior place to where you are. at least in position, if nothing else, then they will also know that I have loved you. That will be evident to them. The ones who look to persecute and trouble you, that are the synagogue of Satan, that are liars, the day is going to come when they will recognize Jesus' love for that particular church, and they will come to a place of humility. Now, however that may be, is it humiliation, or is it a place where they finally come to an understanding, but really in a place of repentance and really of mourning for what they have done? Again, you have people on both sides of that view. And again, if it was obvious from the text that we could know exactly what it is, then there wouldn't be disagreement. But be that as it may, we know that no person should ever accept worship. That would be only reserved for God. So clearly Jesus is not saying you're going to be worshiped. They're not in a place where they should be. So it has a different meaning clearly. Now, here's an interesting thing. And again, here's where you get some real disagreement depending on how people want to view this particular chapter and this particular church and this verse in particular. Now, let's remember, there are those people in the church to this day that teach that most of what we see when the judgments begin to happen in the book of Revelation, that they've already taken place. That is the view of the people known as the preterists, and preter from the Latin just means that it's already taken place. So to be a preterist, you'll look at the book of Revelation and say, all of those judgments and those types and those persons that are being spoken of there, it's not really a universal judgment that takes place. It's more something that was very much localized. And the event that they always say that it was is the falling of Jerusalem in 70 AD at the hands of Titus, Vespasian. So that's the view of many people. So because they say it's already happened, then that means so much of what you read isn't future. It has to be something that's already taken place. So then you get into all of the allegory and the poetry and the symbols, and none of it's literal, and it's just, what a mess. The problem is that much of what we read about in the rest of the book, and we'll get to plenty of it, you'll find that the people that they say it's supposed to be is Nero, and then the ones after him, and the fall of Jerusalem at 70 AD. Some of the descriptions that are given later on in this book, compared to the historical events of what happened in 70 AD, are nowhere near what they're supposed to be if it's a literal fulfillment. Here's a great place for, if you're talking with someone about that, and they say that they're amillennial, here's one of those verses that really is problematic for them if they're going to be faithful to the text. Let me show you what I mean by that. Verse 10 says this, "Now, because you have kept my commandment to persevere, I also will keep you from the hour of trial which will come upon the whole earth to test those who dwell upon the earth." Now, there's a mouthful that's been said there, and it's hugely important to our understanding of what's being said here. So let me just throw this out there. If by chance what Jesus is intending here is that he's going to keep them from what the preterists say is the fall of Jerusalem at 70 AD, then it does seem pretty odd that he would be talking to a church in what is modern-day Turkey when the events happening at Jerusalem wouldn't affect them in any particular way. In fact, by the time that the war broke out and Jerusalem was sacked and burned and all of what happened, the temple was defiled and torn apart, all of that would have begun, happened, and they would be well into the aftermath before any word of it would have ever even reached this part of the world. Because remember, we're talking 2,000 years ago, and information cannot travel that fast. So whatever may have happened, according to their theory, that this is all about Jerusalem, there's no way that any of this would have affected the churches in Philadelphia in this way. And why give these warnings to a church that this just doesn't matter to them if it's about Jerusalem? Hopefully that makes sense. Now, let me stop right here in case I forget to do it later. If my reasoning through this, if for some reason it's not crystal clear, you let me know. either on the YouTube comments, which I leave open, or you can do so through the ministry's website, oldpaththeology.net. And there is an email tab there that you can contact me through that. And I will be happy to go through this with you at length. But again, read what's being said here. There is something that's coming upon. Let's look at the rest of it, and I'll restate my view about this. Because you have kept my commandment to persevere, and again, the perseverance, it just means you've been consistent. So I've told you to persevere, so that perseverance is not just you have, but I want you to be being this way. So when he says perseverance, think consistency. You think of being constant. You're always doing those things, or just enduring. You just never give up. You're patient about these things. So since he has given this command to persevere, I also will keep you from the hour of trial, which is about to come upon the whole world, to test those who dwell on the earth. So the first part of it, again, that idea that Jesus gave a command. Now, it's a little bit hard for us to try to nail down precisely what he would be meaning by a command that he may have given directly. That command means instruction. So if we're trying to look at a place where Jesus would have maybe said something to Philadelphia in the sense that he had spoken to the churches as a general thing about persevering, you can find some of those things. You can find a little bit of it in John, in his writings about, being consistent with him and not wavering and all of those things. But you can also find that as the Lord would be speaking through those who wrote. Let me show you one that I think is really helpful, and it's found in the book of Colossians. So let's go there. Colossians chapter 1. And in Colossians chapter 1, it really kind of is the passage that goes into a lot of what we would consider as the deity of Jesus. So let's start at verse 15. It says, "Now he," speaking of Jesus, "is the image of the invisible God. He's the firstborn over all creation." He's the first of a kind. He's the firstborn of creation, that he's the beginning of all of it. Not that he's part of the creation, but he's the originator of it. He's the first of a kind. So, for by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether they are thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things consist. And he is the head of the church, the body, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in him all things that he would have preeminence. For it pleased the Father that in him all of the fullness would dwell, and by him to reconcile all things to himself, by him, whether they are things on earth, whether they are things in heaven, things having made peace through the blood of his cross, and that you, who once were alienated and enemies in your mind and wicked works, yet now he has reconciled in the body of his flesh through death, to present you holy and blameless and above reproach in his sight, if indeed you continue in the faith, grounded, steadfast, and are not moved away from the hope of the gospel which you heard was preached to every creature under heaven, and which I, Paul, have become a minister. So, Paul says of the entirety of the gospel, there is the recognition of who he is and what he has accomplished, and then there is the not the warning, but there is the encouragement to continue on as though there's no end to this. So if somebody would say, well, this idea of persevering and doing the things that Jesus has instructed them, when is that over with? As long as we're in these bodies, as long as we're here, whether we pass from this life or we are taken at the rapture of the church, we should be as engaged in our relationship with him and our walk and doing the things that he called us to do as the first day that we got saved. It never ends. As long as we have breath in these bodies, we continue. So there's a reward to that he says. Now, to this church, again, as they're reading this, they feel that this must be an imminent event. And it has not taken place. We know historically it's not taken place since their time or any time since. So what this should really help the church to understand is that every church in every age at any time is always in that exact same position. It's an imminent event. It can happen at any time without warning. We want to be prepared and persevering, doing everything that Jesus has commanded to us, whether directly by his own word or those that he has moved upon by the Holy Spirit to continue that message and that teaching. What Paul said there is some of the most weighty and heavy types of theology and doctrine that exists in all of our belief system. And then notice at the end of that, continue on in this, hold it, don't become faithless in this, just persevere, continue on in that. These truths do not move. They are immovable, so operate in them and don't waver. That's really the admonition that we get from Paul, and I believe it really kind of picks up on what Jesus is referring to here. So he says, back to Revelation, he says, if you're going to do that, being faithful to what he has instructed us to do, whether through his own words or anything else that's been said by anyone else, that, people that are writing the scripture, he says, I also will keep you from the hour the hour of trial which shall come upon the whole earth. So that idea of I will keep you out of. Now, it can mean a couple of things. There are those that would believe that it means I'm going to keep you from falling, but you'll still have to go through it. So I'm going to keep you from this hour of trial that's coming upon the whole earth. Now, the hour doesn't mean like 60 minutes. It means an hour as a period of time that's coming up upon the whole earth. Now, once again, that's speaking of the things that are spoken of in this book later on when he gets to all of the judgments. That's the hour of trial that's coming upon, as it says here, the whole earth. Once again, the idea of being the whole earth, looking up that word in the Greek, can sometimes mean in just the general area, as we see in Acts chapter 17, where they talk about these apostles who have turned the world upside down. Well, they hadn't gone to all parts of the world yet, and they hadn't really created that much havoc in the world. There were some things that had happened around Jerusalem, and they thought that had put things in turmoil. But the church was beginning to do some things by Acts 17, but it hadn't turned the world upside down. So very simply, that can sometimes mean a very localized kind of a thing, but it can also mean in a global sense as well. So here's the question. When Jesus says that I will keep you from the hour of trial that is about to come upon the whole earth, then why would they care about anything happening in Jerusalem that doesn't affect them? Now, it will affect them if it does become the whole world as they know it. That's when this church could have a particular problem. So if it's just Jerusalem, like the preterists and the amillennialists say it is, that this whole book is all about history that's already taken place, there is no reason to caution a church half a world away that won't even hear about the events for some time, if ever. Maybe people in the church that will never really fully appreciate what happened in Jerusalem. And at this point, I'm sure that this book was written long after the events anyway. But for those people who believe that it's speaking about the events of 70, they believe that this was written after. It may have been written after, but it's more speaking of it in allegory, looking back at a historical event. Or they believe that it was written before the events because it was speaking about what would happen in Jerusalem. I believe all of that is completely wrong. And I believe that what we're reading here is Jesus talking about an event that has never happened yet and that is all still future. But what he tells them is that when it happens, because of your faithfulness and doing the things that you're going to do and have been doing, I'm going to keep you from having to endure all of that. Not just the troubles for a little bit of time, but for the duration of what takes place. And that hour we would call the day of the Lord, starting at I believe the rapture of the church or closely thereafter, but then there's the 7 years of tribulation, and then the end or the close of that is when Jesus comes back at his second coming. I believe that everything that happens in that interval of 7 years, that's what the church is promised to be kept out of, to be removed from it when God begins to pour out his judgment upon the whole earth. And notice he adds one more little bit here, those who dwell upon the earth. And that's not something small. Those who dwell upon the earth is something that we see in Zechariah No, Zephaniah. Let me see if I wrote those down. Yeah, I did. Zephaniah 1, verses 14 to 18, and also in Isaiah 26:21. There are people who are referred to as the earth dwellers, and these are people who are really reserved for judgment. So once again, if the judgment is universal for all who dwell upon the earth, these unbelievers, then the church would have no part of it. First of all, there's no reason for us to be here. And that's one of the other things that the preterists just cannot explain. I'm sorry, not the preterists, but the people who think that the church should go through some part of it. Some of it, all of it. Once again, what's the use of the church here in those times if you can be put to death for your faithfulness to Jesus? And some would say, well, that doesn't even happen till Revelation 13. You're going to see in Revelation chapter 6, by the fifth seal, there are already people who have been martyred, and that's before the Antichrist has ever been revealed. So Christians will be put to death for their faith in the first seals. The first four seals, you have martyrs in the church. So if the church is supposed to go through it, they can't even get out of that place of their martyrdom until the end of the tribulation. That makes no sense for the church. If the church is left, has left the scene and been taken to Jesus to be with him during those 7 years, people who will come to faith but die in the event of it are going to be here either on earth and make it through, or they're going to be martyred for their faith and held until they're all accounted for at the close of the tribulation. We'll get to that when we get to the seals in chapter 6. So anyway, back to this one. Once again, just big picture here. There is a time of trial that's going to happen to the entirety of the earth. That's what fits the context, because those who dwell upon the earth are the ones who are being judged. The church is not mentioned here. They're told that they're going to be kept from that. And the events that are spoken of in the judgments that are taking place don't fit well in the history of what happened at 70 AD. And we'll have lots of other examples as we go through Revelation where you'll see that the things that are being spoken of there do not fit historically. So, as we move on through this, because you have kept my commandments, verse 10, and commandment to persevere, that's don't give up. Just continue doing what you've done all along with your patience and that idea of being consistent and constant and enduring. Continue to do that. And by doing so, if you're in that place, you're going to be someone who Jesus says, I will keep you from what I'm about to do in the rest of the world to those who dwell upon the earth. You're a separate entity from they that will be judged. Now, he says this, behold, I am coming quickly. The word quickly there is tachu, and it's used as an adverb. It means his coming is a definite thing. It's an action. It will happen. When he comes to earth, that's an action that will happen. The word quickly is not saying in the sense of when it's going to take place as though it's going to happen right now. It's rather when it happens, it's going to happen with incredible speed. It'll happen quickly. So remember, it's verb and adverb. When he comes, whenever that is, it's an event, it's going to happen, it's an action, he will be here. When it happens, everything that's being described here is going to happen very quickly. Tachu, or where we get tachometer from when we think about it as a car. It's going to happen rapidly, so fast. It's going to wrap up instantly relative to what we're thinking about as lengths of time. You know, we're talking thousands of years of the church and of of Israel, and then the church, thousands of years. This is going to wrap up in a matter of just a few years. So when that happens, he says, I come quickly. So he says, now hold fast what you have, that no one take away your crown. And this makes people really nervous. So where he talks about here, holding fast means that you're going to take possession of it. It's very similar to keeping what he has said, but it means that you take something with the intention of retaining it and keeping it for a time. It's very similar to what he's already said about keeping his word. It has that same idea behind it, but it's something that you see, you lay hold of it, and you hold it with the intention of retaining it, never to let it go. So he says, hold fast what you have. Behold, I am coming quickly. Hold fast what you have, and let no one take away your crown. Now, that really, again, has people really freaked out. Doesn't say which crown it is. There are several crowns. There's the crown of the victor. There's the crown of life. There's a few different crowns that are mentioned here. The Greek word here is Stephanos. And Stephanos is that one. It's that wreath that comes around the head, and it's meant as the person who's been victorious. So when he says, don't let anybody take your crown, it's the crown of the victor. Now, again, people get really super nervous about this. And the idea that somebody could take it. Well, it's not taken because somebody has overpowered you. If you're a believer, you're not overpowered by anyone. But if somebody's going to try to make some kind of an enticing case for something and entice you in, that's what's happening in some of the other churches. And so there are a number of places that we find in the text. Remember, we looked at the church at Sardis about blotting out the names. So, a name isn't blotted out if it's not found in the book to begin with, and the unbeliever is not found in the book. In fact, that is something that I mentioned last week, but I don't think I gave the direct citation to it. Let's do that because it's found in chapter 17. And let me get exact. I should have wrote it down. I didn't do so. In verse 7, we read this, "But the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman." He is seeing this woman who is referred to as mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlotry and the abominations of the earth. So the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. We'll get to all of this in 17. But notice what he says here. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And those who dwell upon the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. So that book that has always been, their name has never been in it. So that idea that he only blots out, as Sardis says there, that he's only blotting out the names of the people that never came to faith, well, their names weren't in the book in the first place. They're the earth dwellers, the people that are in unbelief. Their names were never in the book. So a name needs to be there in order to be blotted out. So let me make sure I'm very, very clear on this, because I can hear it now, and I know that this is one of the favorites of people to talk about, well, do you believe that you can lose your salvation? I want to make sure we are really, really careful, because this usually just gets so massacred in the way that it's discussed among believers. Usually, if somebody says, well, do you think that you can lose your salvation? I'll ask them, what do you mean by that? What do you mean? How would a person lose their salvation? They'll say, well, they did this or they did that, and they'll give a litany of things. They divorced their wife. They started drinking. They started doing drugs. They rebelled against the church. Whatever it may be. I'm going to always look at that and say, you're talking to me about symptoms. Because remember, we didn't get saved because we stopped sinning. We got saved because we were forgiven of our sins because of our belief in Jesus that he would save us from our sin. So you didn't get to heaven because you stopped being a sinner. You're still a person who will sin, but you've been forgiven. And you can be cleansed of that. He's made you whole. You've been saved by that. So we are saved by our belief in the finished, completed work of Jesus. Now, I'm hoping that a person from the day that happens walks closer with him each day. That's wonderful. That's what's supposed to take place. But if there is the potential for somebody to have their name blotted out or this losing of crowns or anything else, if anybody is ever going to be in the place where they are not saved, though they have professed belief, and I have no reason to ever doubt that, it will only be because of unbelief after the fact. If free will is genuinely that, free will, then they would be able to exercise that in reverse. And I've met people who fit this perfectly. And if you tell me that they weren't saved in the first place, you can't prove that. Because I've seen and heard and ministered with some of these people who were absolutely as solid doctrinally and theologically as I hope that I am. And the things that they say is exactly, or the things that I say, what I'm saying, or teaching this right here, they would teach it the exact same way. Only now to somehow just say, I do not believe that any longer. Well, then that's not a matter of, well, they sinned their way out of heaven. No, they fell into unbelief, and they will tell you that they did that. They will say, I believed as you do. I do not believe that anymore. Okay, well, if that's the case, that's because somebody got in their ear, whoever it may be. And if that's what's meant by the crown here, because it's not identifying which one it is, but remember, the crown's given to the victor or the overcomer, and that somebody's going to be able to take that from us. It can't be taken by force. It can only be taken by us buying into whatever it is. That's the exchange, if you will. Now, again, people will disagree with me on that. That's fine. They can disagree with me on that. I don't lose any sleep over it that I'll do that someday. There's nothing for me to go to. So anyhow, once again, I don't have a bad day and fall out of favor with God. That's not a matter of belief. That's a bad day. It's when you absolutely, if that's even a potential, and I'll leave it out there just in case I can be wrong, it will only come because of a lack of belief and because of rejection of what you formerly believed. And we do that in our life all throughout our life. We will believe something wholeheartedly at one point, only to come to a different conclusion at a different time. And of our own free will and volition, we will change our mind on something. So if people say that's not even a potential, okay. Verse 12. So along with that line about taking away crowns and that idea of persevering, keeping with what God has already shown us and taught us, he says this: the one who overcomes, I will make him to be a pillar in the temple of my God. He will go out no more. I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God, and I will write on him my new name. A lot of mystery in this, and we cannot absolutely speak with specifics what all of this is, because it's future. It has not yet happened. Once again, I would say to the preterists, when did this happen, and show me these names. Now, they will say, well, we believe that part is still future. Okay. So, to the person who overcomes, same one that we've been seeing, the overcomer is the one who does not fall victim to all of the things that the world will throw at us and fall into a place of unbelief. The overcomer, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Now, here's an interesting thing, because there isn't a temple in this kingdom that's being spoken of here. We learn that in chapter 21. I think it's verse 22, where Jesus is referred to as being the temple. There will not be a temple as we think of it, where there would need to be pillars. But if we're thinking it more in the symbolism kind of way, where the church is referred to as being made up of living stones, that's when we start to get into the understanding that this could be meant. Other places where men are referred to as pillars, we don't have to be, again, how do you make a person a literal pillar that will hold something up? There's a picture that's being illustrated here. So the one who overcomes will be a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will go out no more, which is just a way of saying there'll never be a break in fellowship. I'll always be able to see them. They'll always be able to see me. There'll never be separation. That's what's being spoken of here, and how beautiful is that? I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God, and I will write on him my new name. None of those names are known. The closest that we get is the name of the city of Jerusalem. According to Ezekiel 48:35, it's the Lord is there. That will be something that's known. The temple's known by that name during the millennium, but not in the forever kingdom. So all of this is yet to be revealed. We won't know until that time takes place. So how cool is that? That's the promise. The day is coming when you're going to see us with a new name, and he will be known by a new name. We'll of course know who he is. There'll be some different attribute or something about him that will be known, and that will be, these things will be written upon us. We'll be able to take these upon us as identification, which is all of really what this is supposed to be. It's a way of recognizing as an identification of who these people are and what the place is, who we are. All of those things are a new identification. So let's think in the biggest of the big picture. Whether it was to them or to us, all of the things that were former, the new identifications will be original and never having been seen before. They will all be present at that time. So he says then, now here, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Once again, plural. And I do believe that that doesn't mean just you at Philadelphia and the other 6 churches. You guys need to pay attention to this. I believe that intention, because they have perfect relevance throughout the church, throughout the history of the church, each church should look at what's said to each one of these 7 churches And throughout all of Christianity and throughout all of the church age from this time forward, every church should be studying what's being said to them, recognizing the truth that is there, and they need to apply that properly. Hear what's being said to those churches. You guys need to pay attention as well. So, a lot of information there, a lot of things going on. And if I went through it too fast, or if I didn't fully develop the thought and still left any part of it unclear, please let me know. And again, either do it through YouTube in the comment section there, where we put the videos. I also keep the videos at the website as well, and you can contact me through that as well. So the website is oldpaththeology.net, and the contact us part is there. You can just hit the little drop-down menu, and you can contact me through there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Just give me the specifics. If I lost you on some particular part, you let me know. So we'll pick up at the last of the churches, Laodicea, next week, and we'll start to move our way through the book of Revelation. I look forward to doing this with you. And once again, if you haven't joined us, please do. We're going through the book of Psalms on Thursdays, on Mondays. And so we're always doing Old and New Testament all through the week. We do one study in each book every week. So working through the Bible with us. All right, so look forward to next week, Laodicea.